Good morning, everyone. So as Megan said, I'm Gaby Saavedra. I'm one of the project managers in the Energy and Sustainability Services team at Georgia MEP. My expertise are mostly in environmental compliance, and I'm an ISO 14001 certified lead auditor for environmental management systems and also for the 45001 for occupational health and safety. And my whole team in the Energy and Sustainability Services team has more than 30 years of experience providing assistance with implementing and developing these type of ISO management systems. So welcome. We are here today and we're going to touch on these different topics. I asked at the beginning whether you are familiar with the ISO 14001 standard or you're new. We have some people that is very new. So we will give you a brief overview of what is ISO 14001. We're going to talk about especially changes because that's why we are all here today. So we're going to walk you through the time frame for the publications, give you an overview of the changes, and of course the next steps and how to help you prepare for those changes. So basically, let's go to a little bit of a background on ISO 14001. So what is it? So this is an international recognized standard for environmental management system that of course provides that organizations with a structured framework to manage their environmental responsibilities in a systematic, disciplined, and business-focused way. So this ISO 14001 framework is widely adopted across various industry sectors. We have it for people in healthcare, for manufacturing, transportation, public sector, and others. So ISO 14001 was first published in 1996, and key revisions occurred in 2004 and 2015. So this month, we are in the final stage of the 2026 revision to be actually finalized and published. And this webinar on today, we will cover those key changes that will help you apply to your existing system. So this ISO 14001 follows the Plan, Do, Check, Act, which is a methodology for continual improvement. So that helps organizations ensure that environmental management system becomes a living system, not a static set of documents. So for that reason, ISO 14001 is that foundation that helps organizations to achieve their sustainability goals. So it provides that structured framework to help you identify, manage, control, and also improve your environmental performance and integrate environmental considerations into your day-to-day operations. So why is it important? Just a little bit of a brief overview of the importance. So when an organization like yours, for example, when you commit to ISO 14001, which is voluntary here in the US, it's a way of showing your customers and your stakeholders that your organization really manage environmental responsibilities seriously and systematically. So it shows that you're committed to not only meet environmental regulations, but also to do that continual improvement. So this is especially important today because we live in a world that is increasingly aware of environmental challenges. We now know that climate change, biodiversity loss, resource depletion. So because of these, organizations are feeling that pressure from customers, from investors, from regulators, and surrounding communities to really understand what are those environmental impacts and to take meaningful action to prevent, reduce, and mitigate those impacts. And having this structure, having this ISO 14001 certification, it helps you provide that blueprint for doing exactly that, It helps you to identify environmental impacts, it helps you manage risks and opportunity, sets objectives, but smart goals, what we like to say smart goals, and also helps you to do that continuously improve your performance. So organizations that implement this ISO 14001 effectively, and especially when it's integrated into day-to-day operations, they often see tangible benefits. So one of the benefits that we see is financially, right? Because companies are more conscious in the way that they are controlling and managing their resources, including the way that they're using the energy, the water, the raw materials. So this proactive monitoring also improves the identification of cost-saving opportunities. Organizations that have this ISO 14001 management system also have operational and risk-based benefits. Like, for example, they will have improved regulatory compliance because they will have a structured management approach to controlling and understanding what regulations they are subject to. They also have more consistent and controlled operations and also help them to really enhance that emergency preparedness and reduce their environmental risk. Other benefits are in terms of the culture, right? Having an effective management system, it really helps in having clear roles and accountability for your environmental responsibilities, and it helps you improve that internal communication and coordination between your team. We talked about reputation, right? When I was mentioning about committing to ISO 14001, it's a way of showing your customers and your stakeholders that you really care about environmental responsibilities and that you manage them systematically. So it enhances that credibility and that organizational reputation. And at the same time, it can increase your trust from your customers and your stakeholders. And last but not least, we know that many customers and supply chains now require or prefer ISO 14001 certified organizations. So having this system in place, in many cases, helps your company have greater access to contracts and new businesses. Okay, so let's dive into the reason why we are all here today. So the ISO 14001 is being revised, and it follows its periodically revised every 5 to 10 years to really remain relevant to evolving environmental, climate, and sustainability priorities for the organization. So the standard is currently in the final draft international stage. So the FDs, if you have heard of it, or the FDIS, is that the final draft international standard. So this is this last step in the revision process where the proposed final text was submitted for voting by the ISO members, and it is waiting to be approval. So the voting began in January of 2026 and will finalize March 2026, so this month. The final version of this 14001 is expected to be published in April of 2026. This webinar and everything that we are going to talk about today is based on the FDIS, which is not the final version, but is the final draft, right? So based on our experience with previous ISO versions, we have been working with the ISO management system since basically its inception in 1996, and we were there when it was transitioned to the 2004 and 2015. So based on that experience, most of the changes that are introduced into this final draft stage typically remain in the final version. So it is important to say that anyways, minor adjustments are still possible, but key updates like for example, new requirements or revised requirements are expected to remain in the final version. If you want to learn more about this standard and the different stages, you can scan this QR code that it will take you to the ISO website, just for your reference. Okay, well, let's talk about the changes. So the changes can be grouped into 3 overarching themes. So the first group of changes that we are going to talk about occurred to really improve their whole system or the whole standard structure and clarity. So this 2026 standard provides a clearer structure by really reorganizes certain clauses to improve the logical flow and understanding of the intent of the requirements. So we see it's easier for us to really understand. It also includes refined and more effective language with the goal of avoiding misinterpretation. So I'm going to talk about that more in a little bit. Another change that we see, or another theme, we see that this 2026 revision brings a stronger emphasis in really identifying those risks and opportunities and emphasizes in the alignment of this risk management approach into that strategic and operational decision making. If you are familiar with the standard or you already have a mature system in place, you will know that this risk-based approach is not new. it has always been at the core of the effective management systems. However, these minor or structural changes and terminology changes bring more emphasis on that proactive approach of a comprehensive risk management that must be clearly demonstrated and integrated into your planning and into your overall business processes. But I will talk more about that in a moment. And the last theme of changes was on new language for documentation. So this revision introduces new terminology and greater specificity around that document information that is required to demonstrate conformity. So the main purpose of these changes is to facilitate our understanding of the document and information that is needed to show conformance to different clauses. We see that for competence, for planning, for operational controls. So this clarity really ensures that we as an organization understand what those requirements related to documentation are, and it's easier for us to really gather evidence to ensure conformance. And if you have any questions throughout this whole process, feel free to add it in the chat and we will cover that in the Q&A session. Okay, so let's explain a little bit more about those changes that were related to improved structure and clarity on requirements. So the first changes that occurred were in clause 4, which is for context of the organization. So we have in here two subclauses, 4.1, which is understanding the organization and its context, and also 4.2, which is understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. So these clause is about really understanding who you are as an organization, and that is important to really put together and develop your environmental management system. And the first change that we see here in clause 4.1 is that it was expanded. So now we see that this clause explicitly requires organization to consider specific environmental conditions when determining internal and external issues that can affect the EMS. So in the 2015 version, if you already have a system, if you have it with you at the moment, you can go to 4.1 and you read that this requirement was already there. What is new is that they included a list of these specific environmental conditions. So we have now pollution level, availability of natural resources, climate change, biodiversity, and ecosystem health. So these specific conditions were included because they are closely linked to the three pillars of sustainable development. We have the environmental pillar, we have the social pillar, and the economic pillar. So the expectation for this new expanded clause is that you as an organization conduct a more deeper and holistic assessment of how those activities interact and depend on the environment. So how your activities as a company interact and depend on the environment, and that you are able to show evidence of these assessments, that you have actually evaluated those interactions, that you really understand the interactions and which ones are going to be addressed throughout your environmental management system. The next change in 4.2, which is about needs and expectation of interested parties, this clause was also expanded. And now the requirement is that organizations need to determine which needs and expectation that become its compliance obligation. Also you need to show and determine how those will be addressed throughout the EMS. So there was a little bit of wording added to add clarity on the requirements. So this small change emphasizes that identifying interested parties and their needs and expectations is not an isolated exercise, right? So these relevant needs and expectations, and particularly those that are related to those environmental conditions that are listed in 4.1, must be clearly linked and really understand how they are linked to different sections of the standard, like, for example, to your compliance obligations, to your risks and opportunity evaluation, to your operational controls, and how are they going to be addressed through the EMS. Moving on, another change that happened to the structure to add some clarity on the requirement was in clause 5. So there was a note that explained what business is, and this note was repositioned right underneath 5.1.c to really help organizations better understand the term business and its applicability for the requirement to leadership. And the requirement for leadership here is that they are required to ensure the integration of the EMS into the organization's business processes. And now we reference what business is. So business are activities that are activities that are core to the purpose of the organization's existence. So let's say, for example, if your process requires to do multiple activities, including plating, coating, grinding, let's say that you conduct any of these in other facilities. So you might think that they shouldn't be within your scope. Well, right now, and this change is for you to really consider if they should still be part of their scope, because it's a core to the purpose of you producing your product. So you can't exclude any activity because it's crucial, but because you have it in and you do it outside your facility because it has higher impact, or because you want to avoid dealing with it in another facility. You may have to include it in your scope based on the definition of business. So really just think about that. Okay, another change in structure was in clause 6.1 for planning. Now we have a new clause or a new subclause for risks and opportunities. So this has been given the subclause 6.1.4. And we are going to talk a little bit more about this in the next theme of changes. But just so you know, this is a structural change that also provides a little bit more clarity on that requirement. Another change in structure was in 9.3 management review. So now we have the separation between the inputs and results for our management review. So now 9.3.2, it's the inputs, and 9.3.3, it's all the requirements related to the outputs. This change is basically to improve the visibility and clarity of the requirement associated with the inputs and the results that shall be included in the management reviews. Okay, and the final change associated with that structure and clarity was in clause 3. So if you are familiar with the standard, you may know that clause 3 is not auditable, right? Only clauses 4 to 10 have the requirements and you have to show conformance to them. So clause 3 is actually for terms and definitions. However, I do think it's very useful, and I suggest you to go back and read the different terms because it provides valuable information on the terms and how to use them during the implementation of the standard. So a way of really understanding these concepts is crucial to successfully implement the concepts effectively across the EMS. This 2026 revision brings a replacement of the term outsource. So now instead of outsource and outsource processes, we now have the wording externally provided processes, products, or services. This change happened not only to better describe the term, now we have like a more extended term that is more specific to what we want to say, but it also helps to adhere with ISO requirements for management systems, so it supports integrations with other management systems. However, the definition remains the same. We know that externally provided processes, products, and services are used by organization, but supplied by others outside the organization. So the definition is the same, we just have like a more extended term. Another change was in the term risk. So in the 2015 version, in the current standard, we have a definition for risk in this clause 3. However, the term risk was removed from the whole document, as the term risk is not longer used in isolation. So now instead of risk, we have risks and opportunities, but overall the definition remains the same. We know that risks and opportunities are potential adverse effects and potential beneficial effects. So this just emphasizes for you as an organization to consider whenever you are looking into that risk assessment, not only think about the adverse effect, but also about the beneficial effects. And other changes that occurred in this clause 3 are new definitions for policy, for process, and for indicators. So I recommend you to go back into this section and review the new definitions as they bring more clarity on how to apply these terms throughout the standard. Okay, well, let's talk about the second theme of changes that occur related to that stronger emphasis on risks and opportunity. And that is related to clause 6, the planning clause. So as I mentioned before, a risk-based approach is really not new to ISO 14001. Currently, and in the 2015 version, there are multiple requirements that for organizations to really identify and address risks and opportunities in clause 6. So what was the change? Well, clause 6 was actually reorganized to better guide organizations when identifying these risks and opportunity, and to explicitly now determine potential emergency situations and the environmental impacts that these may cause as a crucial part of identifying environmental aspects. So in your current version, the 2015, we see the term potential emergency situations referenced later in the clause, in clause 6, and also later in the standard, but not necessarily linked to environmental aspects. So this 2026 revision clearly links environmental aspects to potential emergency situations by emphasizing that importance of a comprehensive risk assessment to determine those potential emergency situations that can have impacts. Another change that happened in this clause 6 was related to life cycle perspective. This life cycle perspective was introduced in 2015, and it has been a little bit of a struggle for companies to understand the concept. But at the beginning, when it was introduced, it was to push organizations to think carefully about the life cycle stages of their processes, products, and services, and what can be controlled, what can be influenced, and what are their associated aspects and impacts. So the change that occurred here, it's a note really to explain and help the facility understand what this life cycle perspective. And the note that you will see referenced now in 6.1.2 is not new. You can actually go and find it in your current 2015 standard. You go to the annex section in section 8.6.1.2. This whole annex section provides explanatory information about each of the clauses of the ISO management system. And we sometimes miss it because it's not auditable. It doesn't have the requirements, so we just never read that. Well, this note that was already in the annex, it was brought now into the whole like requirements section, so that it gives guidance to organizations when considering a life cycle perspective. So you will see that in the actual standard. Moving along, another change that we see, as I was mentioning before, was a standalone clause for 6.1.4 risks and opportunities. So this is really to help organizations have a clear reference in the standard for conducting a comprehensive risk assessment and their associated requirements that need to be considered for these risks and opportunity assessments. So this reinforces that importance of a systematic and documented approach when identifying and addressing your risks and opportunities. Another change, and I think is one of the most significant changes in this 2026 revision, is the addition of a new clause for 6.3, planning of changes. So this is totally new compared to the 2015 version. However, the requirement, if you read it, is not necessarily new. So previously, requirements related to managing change were embedded in other sections of the standard. We saw it in 6.1.2 for environmental aspects. We saw it also in operational controls. However, this 2026 revision explicitly requires organizations to plan and manage changes in a systematic or a planned manner. And it reinforces this by having its own clause 6.3. Which requires organizations to evaluate how planned or unplanned changes may affect the EMS activities to achieve its intended outcomes. This new requirement 6.3 also aligns more closely to other ISO standards, like, for example, for the quality management system. So it supports the integration of management systems. Whether you have any new equipment or new technology, whether you have process changes, operating conditions, you now have to show that you could have considered those planned or unplanned changes, and that you know that they will not affect the EMS ability to achieve its intended outcomes. Another change that occurred in order to show that stronger emphasis on risks and opportunities is in clause 10, continual improvement. So at this stage in clause 10, it's about the acting phase, right? In the plan, do, check, act. In this phase, organizations really strive to continually improve their environmental management system. So this clause and the change here, what it means is that it was expanded to emphasize the need to determine opportunities for improvement and to implement necessary actions to achieve the intended outcomes of the EMS. So in other words, this 2026 revision brings improvement that is now defined by opportunities and that risks and opportunities assessment, which links it back to that stronger emphasis in identifying those risks and opportunities and how organizations integrate them into action plans for continual improvement. Okay, let's talk about the final theme of changes that occur related to terminology for documentation. So this 2026 revision introduces new terminology for documentation and a greater specificity around the document and information that is required to demonstrate conformity. So the current 2015 standard, we see the phrase maintain document and information, which is referred to those documents. And documents, for the ones that are new to the ISO language, it refers to those documents that can be modified, updated, or revised. For example, let's say you have work instructions on how to use equipment, or you have your environmental policy, or you have your environmental objectives that is updated every year. So in those are just examples of documents. So in this 2026 revision, they replaced the wording of maintain document information, and now we see shall be available as document information. Similarly, in the current standard, we had the phrase retain document information, and that we refer to those records. Records can be corrected, records can be corrected, but never change, right? For example, let's say that you have some training records, you completed some inspection forms, and the forms or your checklist have already been completed. Those are records that can't be changed, but can be corrected. The wording for retain document information was replaced by document and information shall be available as evidence. So this change aims to simplify and clarify what organizations must have and what they must be able to provide. So the term shall be available really means that the organization must be able to obtain, use, or provide that information when needed to ensure an effective environmental management system. So it does not prescribe, let's say, in a specific format that you have to maintain those documents. It doesn't say a specific storage method. It only requires that objective evidence exists and that can be accessed. For example, let's say that in your EMS scope, which is in clause 4.3, the requirement is that the scope shall be available as document and information. So in this case, the scope is a document, right? And the requirement is that it must be accessible to people who need them. So, but the standard does not require a formal way to keep your EMS scope. You can have it in your digital EMS manual, you can have it in your communication board, you can have it even in your ISO 14001 awareness training. As long as your staff can obtain and use that information, it meets the requirement for document information. Another example for records, let's see, for example, in clause 7.2 for competence, The requirement is that appropriate document information shall be available as evidence of competence. So we have to show the records for competence and for training. So in this case, the training record should be accessible when needed and appropriate, giving your organization flexibility to control those documents as it best suits you. So the main goal of this change of terminology is to move away from those document-heavy systems and to promote systems that are, in most cases, digital. But the most important thing is that they are effective and they are efficient. One of the big struggles that companies have is that they have a system full of documents rather than a well-documented system. So this change really provides greater flexibility on how organizations control documents in an efficient and effective way. Another change related to documentation was in clause 9.2 for internal audit programs. So this clause now was expanded to include the list of document and information that shall be available for your organization's internal programs. So you will see that, and the intent of this change is to make sure that you have objective evidence that shows that you have an audit program, evidence of the implementation of your audit program, and evidence of the audit results. So if you already have a mature system, as we know that we have attendees that already have a system in place, you may already have evidence of these items in the forms of internal audit reports, in terms of audit agenda, you know who participated in the audits, you know who conducted the audits. You may also have evidence in your management review, because these are important inputs that we consider when we are doing our management review. So you may already fulfill this requirement, but we want to invite you to rethink about your current documentation processes, if it aligns with this new requirement for internal audit program, or if it needs a few tweaks to fully meet the specificity of documented information that is required for your audit program. And that was it. That was a very high-level overview of the changes and how they may apply to your current system. So based on this overview of the changes, can you please, if you would, scan this QR code and let us know if your current system already meets, if you think it meets your proposed requirements, yes or no, or you think it needs a few tweaks to fully meet the new proposed requirements. So I'll leave this for a minute, and if you could just scan the QR code and let us know your responses. I know that for the ones that are taking it in your phone, it might be hard to respond, so you can just leave us a note in the chat if you can't scan the QR code, if it doesn't work for you. But I see that we already have 7 responses, so it does work for somebody. Okay. 11 responses. Okay, well, let's see. Okay, well, we have a very half and half. So half of or a little bit more of 50% of the attendees think that their current system meet the proposed new requirements, and some of you guys don't. So these changes can be considered minor, but at the same time, it's all about like really ensuring and going back to our system and making sure the wording is updated if in case that you already have an environmental management system manual, you may have to go and change the wordings. But then this information is very helpful for us, because we also want to let you know how these changes will impact you. So thank you for your responses. So now how these changes impact you as an organization. So your company basically will have 3 years to transition from the ISO 14001 2015 to the 2026. You will have three years, right? So your certificates will be valid until March 2029. So, however, these may apply different to organizations depending on where they are in their certification cycle. So the grace period for the transition is 18 months, but after March 2029, nobody will be allowed to have an ISO 14001:2015 certificate. Everyone should have already transitioned to the 2026 version by then as an organization. In terms of your professional certifications, and I know that we have a great team of lead auditors here attending these webinars. So regarding your certification, the expectation is that you as a lead auditor, we only have to take a refresher course covering the new requirements. We still don't have all the details about how to get upgraded to that 2026 version. But once the final standard is released in April 2026, we will know. So we'll let you know also. Stay tuned for more information from us. Just to finally say that the deadline for transition is estimated to be 2029. So what are your next steps, right? So the first thing that we recommend you to do is to really inform your internal team on the expected changes. And you can do this by looking into ISO 14001:2026 training opportunities. We at Georgia Tech actually have a workshop planned that I'm going to tell you more details about it in a moment, but you can also develop your own training and make sure your team is aware of the changes. The second step that we recommend is to contact your certification body. So you may be able to achieve the upgrade to the 2026 version during your surveillance year, but the updates and the timeline on the certification, it will be different, right? Depending on where you are. So go ahead and reach out to your certification body as soon as possible, because they might be very busy and they might not be able to accommodate you in the near future. So make sure you plan with time. The next step that we recommend also is to conduct a gap assessment for those that responded that their current system, they are not feeling sure that it currently meets the new changes. And for the ones that said that your current system already meets that standard, well, you still want to make sure that it does. So conduct a gap assessment to your current system and compare it. And finally, develop an action plan for implementing this 2026 revision. And for that, we want to invite you to our implementing class. So this will be a one-day workshop in which we will cover all the changes that we covered today, but in more detail. And we will explore how those changes may impact your current system and also help you outline practical implementation strategy that is tailored to your organization. So we will have interactive hands-on activities to help you develop those action items that are key for an effective transition from your current standard to the 2026 version. If you're interested in this, this is going to be in May 19. We are also going to have 2 other workshops later in the year, in August and in October. But if you think that you can join us in May 19, go ahead and scan that QR code and register it. If not, we will also post these in our LinkedIn and social media, so you can also have links to register by then, if I'm going too fast. As you can see, we love QR codes, but if you have any questions related to the changes, related to internal audits that you may be looking for, if you need help with doing those gap assessment, feel free to reach out to us. So this is my email, and Sandra's our senior project manager, and to Megan, who helped us develop and plan the logistics for this webinar. Thank you. And of course, thanks to our great team of instructional designers that help help put together these beautiful and compliant slides for you. We also have QR codes so that you can follow our newsletter and stay tuned for any changes related to the new standard that is being published next year in April 2026. And just a little bit, a little bit of a background on who we are at Georgia MEP. So we are an extension program from Georgia Tech, and our main goal is to really support and advance manufacturing in Georgia. So we have been in working with manufacturers for over 65 years. So last year was our 65 years anniversary, and we hope to continue supporting manufacturers for many more years. So the way that we work is that we have regional managers located in or in charge of different counties. So if you are way in the south counties in Georgia and you think it's too far for Georgia Tech to reach you or to help you, well, it's not. We have a regional manager that covers that area, so you can scan that QR code and reach out to that region manager, and they will let you know if we can help you or not. But I'm sure that we can, because we offer services in multiple areas. We have experts in automation, cybersecurity, food safety, human resources. You need it, you just name it. But just to let you know about some of the impacts that we had, we helped more than 1,000 manufacturers last year, and we want to help you not only improve your environmental performance, but also operate efficiently. So last year we had and health facilities achieve over 15 million in cost savings and others. So with that, I will open it up for questions, and here is the link to register for our workshop for our practical implementation and transition guidance to the 2026 standard. And if you would like to tell us something about the standard, any question that you have, you can unmute yourself, or you can drop your question in the chat.